want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation similar to last time.
I had a couple of questions. It isn't shown on the plan, but do you know what the width of the lot is at the house? So lot 1, do you meet the
It's in
requirement?
excess of 200 feet,
Oh, okay,
because it widens out. The initial, the frontage is 200 feet and it widens out as it approaches the house.
okay. And I'm assuming that you would be able to meet those requirements for the house locations.
Yes, these are rather big properties. It's, the plan's at 60 scale. The middle lot's about 266 feet wide, and the rear lot's about 300 feet wide.
Okay.
So they should be well in excess of that.
And then in terms of the chapter stuff, do you have any record of how that plan was filed? In terms of, typically they'll leave out the required lot size, but I've seen situations where they leave out more due to a garage or a set of solar panels, potentially.
I'm not as familiar with the chapter land on this. I know that the property owner has
I
talked with
just
the
bring it
assessing
up.
department.
Yeah,
To
I just
begin
bring-
that process.
Yeah.
Of getting out of the
Yep.
chapter, so.
I just bring it up as kind of a point of reference in terms of, for other stuff and Board of Health and all the other jazz you gotta go through.
Yep.
So,
I would make a motion that we approve the A&R plan as submitted for 322 Flat Hill Road with the suggestion or requirement that we notify other land use boards of the withdrawal from chapter.
Can't condition an A&R.
Okay.
So I mean, that could be a
okay, so
separate motion
separate
for
motion.
the board to
Okay.
take care of.
Okay, separate motion.
second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Moving on, our next is,
The easel.
you guys gonna sign that, or you wanna wait? You wanna write for Mylar?
I could pick it up tomorrow if that's, I'm probably coming up to town anyways. If you guys want, as long as you're signing it tonight, it doesn't matter.
Well, why don't
I
we
could
just-
take it to work.
Sign it? Yeah. Sure, we'll sign it. That way it doesn't get
Wrong one. Hold our town. You know what kind of fun that is? So this is a tracking form for us internally, so once you get it recorded, just fill it out, send it back to us. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just, we like to know where stuff comes from.
Our next order item is 335 Chase Road for a proposed common driveway and an A&R plan.
Hi, I'm David Leroy. I'm a professional land surveyor with Hannigan Engineering. It's my understanding you reviewed our A&R at your last meeting and requested to see a site plan showing our common driveway. common driveway portion is highlighted in yellow. It extends about almost 100 feet from Northfield Road. And we have a 25-foot leveling area at about roughly 2%. And then it, like I said, it extends for almost 100 feet, and it will not exceed 9%. It's roughly 8% as designed. And then this portion will serve the one lot, and then the other lot will continue straight ahead to the next house.
Where are the lot lines in relationship to the driveway?
There's a lot line.
Okay, so it
So the
doesn't
center-
straddle the lot
The
line.
center line of the proposed driveway is at the center line is at the lot line.
The center line is at the lot line?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Did you alter the lot lines?
No, the lot line starts here, and it's at the center line, and then due to the well positioning required down here, the lot line has to come to the south.
Do you have the A&R plan?
I do, and it should still be in your packet.
Oh,
A
Well,
copy of that as well.
if you left it in from last week.
But the common driveway doesn't straddle the lot line.
It doesn't straddle the lot line.
It starts at the
It
intersection
starts
of
at
the two
inter-
lot lines.
That's right,
And cuts through lot 2.
yes.
yeah, I
Topo
can't
on
figure it out.
There's a slight portion on Lot 3, but the majority of it is proposed on Lot 2.
This buffer zone here almost follows the lot line. Here is the lot line here,
Okay,
and it comes back through. So it starts at the intersection of the two lots, and this lot balloons out.
okay, so it starts here.
Correct. So this is a utility and a grading easement,
Okay,
and the common driveway sits sort of in the center of it.
okay,
And I mean, even on this, the driveway's really hard to see if you're
Yeah,
not looking at it. So if
yeah,
you
yeah.
actually start at the house, you can kind of trace back. And find the,
okay, that's what I was trying to do this afternoon, and I couldn't. In the event that this common driveway was not approved, is there the potential to install a driveway on the adjacent lot? I understand the reasoning for why you're requesting the common drive, but
There is, it would require more work within the buffer zones and
Okay.
require more alteration of land within the buffer zones.
Okay. But do you have any idea where it would be? Did you look at that when you originally designed the lot?
You could get a driveway through,
Okay, so it
Around
would just
the lot
require,
line.
but it would
But it
be
would-
in the same general area, and it would require additional,
the one would service Lot 2, and then it's possible, but not
not
desirable.
Not as desirable as the other, but
Right.
it is potentially feasible, but you would have to do an additional wetland crossing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, are we doing both this evening?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
only the A and R is on the agenda.
No, they're both on there.
Common driveway and A&R.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm sorry.
That's right.
And that was per the board's request at the last meeting
Yep.
to
Yep.
include the request for the common driveway to give you comfort on the A&R.
So another thing that we are supposed to be looking at is retention of existing stone walls, and it looks like a good portion of that one, if not all of it, will stay.
So that stone wall that's shown
Oh,
that you're
that
is
maybe not be-
existing, or is that a retaining wall?
No, I think he's referring to the wall
It
of the
does
road.
look, yeah, no, you're right, I'm sorry. That is a proposed retaining wall
That is
along
a
the driveway?
retaining wall.
No, there's just grading along there. There's a proposed retaining wall at the proposed house site,
At the edge of the septic,
It's
right?
just, that's where we have the grading and
The septic, yeah.
construction and grading easement for the fill for the driveway.
It appears on the plan that you had last week, there's a small section of stone wall. If you look at the intersection of the lots between Lot 2 and Lot 3, right at the road, it looks like there's a short section of wall.
Existing well along the road line?
Yeah.
I don't see that there. We have a section here, and, let's see.
You're talking about right behind the replication area? On the
No, there's no wall. There's a short section here.
Let me just
And
show
then
you
there's-
what, I think what was
Little section.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Okay.
right here.
And does...
Yes.
What
There-
is that?
there-
Do you
That
think
is,
that is?
that is field stone wall.
So that's an
Yep.
existing field?
That's
stone?
existing field stone wall.
And is that proposed to be retained is the question?
Yeah,
It
that
appears
won't
so.
be impacted by the common driveway.
Okay, and if you had to put the driveway there, it would be impacted? Because that's what you just
yeah.
talked about the fact.
Potentially,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
The wall remnants out there are scattered and it's not a very defined wall.
I mean, in my estimation, that's the best solution for, given the wetlands and the wall, knowing that Northfield Road is a scenic byway. It seems like this is a less intrusive approach.
I agree. So I would make a motion to approve the A&R plan for 335 Chase Road.
The only question I have is, it looks like that wall sits in the replication area. Oh, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's above it, so. I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
That was the A&R.
I would make a motion to approve the proposed common drive at 335 Chase Road. Can I ask a question? Can I make it with the stipulation that the fieldstone wall
Yes.
be retained?
This is something that you can condition.
With the stipulation that the existing fieldstone wall be retained?
My only question on that is, it appears as though the replication areas are on town land. How does that work in terms of,
I would infer that one would need permission and an easement to replicate wetlands on town property. Luckily, that's not something you have to worry about, and that could be I'm assuming this project has not gone to conservation at this time, so that is something that would be discussed at conservation, and I mean, I can certainly appreciate not wanting replication on town property, or being cautious of.
I just know that area pretty well. I travel Northfield Road all the time and actually own a piece of land not too far from here. I mean, we're promoting stormwater management and rain gardens and all these things. And, I mean, that's been a drainage swale for years. In the spring, it runs heavy. So, in my mind, what better place could you pick than to put it right there? I just want to make sure that, you know, from their perspective, they don't get tangled up in it.
And it would need
Yes.
permission, and I know that there was a property, I think also on Northfield Road, maybe down on the other section, that required an easement from town meeting in order to install a septic system. So it may be something that it might be worth looking into if that's the plan for replication. Yeah, but just as a heads up.
Motion on the floor.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, you're signing it.
I would like to thank you folks for having worked with us to allow us to go by our rules. Good moment.
You can just fill that out and send it back and then we can see it.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a small community.
All right, our next item is Robb's Hill Road and Sunset Lane, proposed common drive.
Good evening. This particular project was brought back in the spring. We had withdrew it without prejudice so we could gather some more information, and in hopes of having more board members. These are the same three that were here prior. I had heard there was a fourth member, so...
There is. There is.
There is, they're just not here tonight.
Correct.
So, may we request to just reschedule this to your next meeting? So that we could have 4 members here?
I don't see a problem with that.
I don't
That's
have a
totally the
problem with
board's purview.
Well, yeah, I have no issue with it, or you could proceed and get feedback and take a straw poll.
I think we'd just
and-
rather present it all to all 4 at one time, if we may.
Well, we don't have 5.
I understand that.
Okay.
But we knew there were
So-
4, so,
All right.
if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, so, sorry for the delay.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got here early tonight. Thank you very much. So you'll let me know when the date and time?
Yeah, it'll be in January,
Okay.
because they've already pushed off, no, unless you want to come on the 23rd.
No, I won't be around.
No, we're not meeting on the 20th.
Yeah, I know.
I was gonna say, we're not-
After the holidays. All right. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Neil.
Two.
All right, moving right along. Our next item is Emerald Place at Lake Whalen.
So I brought to the attention of the board a bond that was outstanding at Lake Whalen, at the Emerald Place development. I went back through the files, and there had been engineering reviews throughout the construction of the project. There was some conflict amongst, between the project developer and the board on what the purpose of the bond was, because at the time that the project was approved, the improvements along the waterfront on town property and the roadway were included in the project, and the project proponents believed the bond to be for that construction. The board felt it was for the other. But there were releases up until August of 2014, and what I was able to find is that the outstanding issues were final pavement issues and repairs to Cape Cod berms. I spoke to the DPW director today. He was the one who had raised the issues and said he has had no issue with the development to this date, and he said that they did finish paving to his satisfaction at the time. The review engineer at the time was Ross Associates, and it was Jesse Johnson, who left Ross Associates right around when the last release was done. So, you know, I don't know how the board would like to handle it. The project was completed multiple years ago, and I don't know that, I mean, we could get a final inspection. I don't know that there's a lot to hang a hat on after multiple years of maintenance, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Was it last year that they finished the houses on the, at the old beach? I thought they didn't finish those until last year.
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it just last year?
Yeah.
Really? I thought that they had been up since at least 2017.
No, not the ones across the street.
The water slide.
The water side.
Okay.
There was a question at the last meeting about whether or not the sidewalks met the requirements.
Yeah, and their detail shows one thing, their plans, layouts show a different thing. So if you scale the plan layout, it's less than 4 feet. If you look at the detail, it's 4 feet. And through the construction, there was no flagging of the sidewalks as an issue.
So even in the reviews that were done?
Correct.
There was no question raised?
There was nothing that said, oh,
as
this-
to the
The sidewalks
Sidewalks.
appear to be substandard or inadequate width or whatever.
And when we're discussing the sidewalks on town property.
No, these are the sidewalks on the interior of the development.
But how would that work in terms of, like, it's not a subdivision where we own that.
That's the
so-
difficult part of it is, normally on a development like that, we wouldn't even take a bond, except for work being done on public property or that the town might accept.
Now, see, this is where I have issues, because we required a bond on Stone Farm. And that is not a roadway that the town's going to accept, and it is private property.
Correct, but that was done as a subdivision road. So,
Okay.
I understand.
Or went bankrupt and.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, because conceptually, it doesn't make sense that you would take something, the two are fairly similar.
Yes.
The roadways at Emerald Place are driveways. They're not roads for
There are roads in Emerald Place.
not per our definition of roads. So the development at Emerald Place, those are not rights of way. They're interior driveways to a development site. Whereas at Stone Farm, that is a right of way. It's a road.
But the town doesn't maintain it.
Correct. The association does. Because of the way that it was. But
My knowledge is at Stone Farm, it was never accepted as a town road.
correct. So in theory, because they went through the
So it was
subdivision
built to the
process.
standard.
Correct. They could
But-
come and petition town meeting to accept the road.
Yeah.
But I believe as part of whatever original agreement was, they wouldn't do so. Similar to, the village at Flat Hill. Those are all considered roads. They're rights of way, but they're owned and maintained by the association.
And there was a bond required for that development.
Correct, because it was
as
done as a subdivision. It was a cluster, but it also had a subdivision approval
Oh,
to create the construction of the roadways.
so there are actually separate lot lines out there?
There are not.
There are on the,
There are exclusive use areas. So, though the individuals don't own those, they just have sole use over them.
As does the condominiums at the Woodlands development.
Correct.
So there was a bond, I'd like to understand this bond issue, because historically, and at the time I worked for the town,
Yeah.
when this was going on, and not for tonight, but at some point I'd like to understand, and while I understand what you're saying is that it's not a town road, I also believe, if you look at the situation we ended up with on Stone Farm, had we not had that bond, that work would not have proceeded, and the residents could potentially be negatively impacted.
Correct.
So
And-
I'd like to understand the requirements and the legal ability to require a bond.
So I would like to understand how it was done previously, and I don't.
Okay.
And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure it out.
So perhaps this is something we could have Adam in to talk about?
Well, no, I mean, I understand what I would advise the board to do going forward. And
Okay.
how, going forward, I would look at this. What I don't understand is how it had been retroactively applied by my predecessor.
Okay.
I think that there was bonds required for everything. There was amounts of inspection and review on projects that I don't know we would necessarily have the legal basis to require today if someone were to challenge it. And I don't know that they existed then, but people went along with it.
So maybe moving forward, not necessarily tonight, at some point, we can have that discussion.
Correct.
What the legal ability of the
Yes.
planning board is.
We certainly can.
Because I'd like to understand what we can do so that we don't end up in a situation like we did with Stone Farm, where the development is not half occupied and things are not completed.
Correct.
That's the situation I don't want us to end up in.
And I think that and I'll look at it again, I think that it's going to be based on what zoning bylaws things are approved under, and whether those or our rules and regulations allow for the requirement of such a bond.
Okay.
But we can put that in for later.
And do we have anything on the final pavement? Was that within the development or was that on?
It was within the
Lakeview?
development, and it
within
was
the
a matter of
development.
how it married up with what was done externally, and it was a concern that the DPW director had raised.
Okay.
And I spoke with him today, and he said, oh geez, they've been done forever, I don't have any problem with them.
Okay. So given that information from the DPW director and the fact that we may not have even had the legal ability to require this bond, I would make a recommendation or a motion that we release the surety for Emerald Place at Lake Whalen.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Solar bylaw.
So I think tonight, the survey is really the only thing that we need to, well, the only thing I don't have a whole lot for you other than the survey. What I've started doing is going through the bylaw and trying to update and make changes per the things that we've sort of talked about, so there's at least a marked up copy that the board can start to look at and work off of. I got stuck end of last week just with numbering and lettering, and I had to put it aside for a minute because the way I had numbered things and subsection things didn't fit into the way the E-code is done, so I didn't want to look at it, and I didn't think it served anybody to stick an off numbering in there, so I'll go back to that and have something for you in the next couple of weeks. But the survey we talked about, and Marissa did forward some comments, which I think you all have in your packet. And, you know, I agree with most of what she said. I was trying to put some just thoughts out there about what you may want to ask about, and I'm happy to take input on how you want to ask those questions.
I have read Marissa's recommendations, and I agree with her recommendations on question 1 to 7, and I agree with the additional question that she proposes.
Okay.
But I do have a question about the fencing and what the rationale was behind why you put the fencing on, because she has concerns about why we should include that.
I was just sticking things in there that I thought that the board had, and again, this wasn't like, oh, this is the survey we should do. It was, here's some things that I've heard the board raise questions about. I put the fencing in there just as a, you know, we're opening stuff up, we had a conversation about fences last week. It didn't seem like the board necessarily wanted to regulate it, but if they thought they did, it would be a question to add in there.
Yeah, I would share her concerns about liability on if we dictate exactly what kind of fence.
I had a question on number 8. Since we have had discussions about this clear cutting of private property, we currently don't have anything to back us on requiring somebody not to clear cut their own property, right?
Not from just going and logging it in a pre-application perspective. This sort of goes with, I've seen some solar bylaws that limit the clearing of property for a solar field to X percentage or X number of acres, and this was something that was brought up during the settlers' discussions. about the removal of 30-some-odd acres of forest and the impact it would have, and they clearly didn't, remove any trees prior to seeking approval, so this would cover those. You did send me the air bylaw, and that certainly does have some protections. We could also, in concert with this, put something like that in place, and that would prevent some of the pre-development or pre-approval clearing.
Did I forward that also to you guys? The
No.
air last year passed a land disturbance
Yes.
bylaw? Land disturbance bylaw. It was somewhat in concert with our removal and fill bylaw, but it also addressed clearing of trees.
I'd love to see it.
I will forward it to you, or Adam can.
I'll send it out. And the reason I didn't see it after you mentioned is it's a zoning bylaw. And normally you would expect that type of stuff to be general because it covers all, but I understand, how it works in there too. In looking at this in the office and speaking with Marjorie, number 9, she suggested that not everyone knows what a solar canopy is. So if we're going to do paper, we could include pictures. I have to look at SurveyMonkey and see if we can include pictures on that, but I'm not sure if we can.
But you can add text as to what a canopy is.
Yeah, we could.
after you can-
Yeah.
You can describe.
And I know that might take some of the concerns about limiting large-scale development in residential areas away, because someone could go to Walmart or Hannaford and put in a significant size field in an existing impervious area that would not necessarily impact the natural order of land. So if you don't know what the solar canopies are, they're, the posts that have, it's essentially a covered parking area with solar panels on top of it.
Well, and our existing bylaw says, like, if you have a parking garage.
Correct.
It's a structure, we don't. We
Can't regulate.
But I don't think the canopies
Need a building permit. It's a structure.
Yeah. And the reason I just sort of put it on there is I've seen bylaws that specifically call those out as a by right use. And I think with the structures, they're generally talking about buildings and existing structures, not creating structures in order creating structures that are just solar panel supports.
But the point is, I think Tan's point is you have to get a building permit, and these would be of such a size that they're fairly substantial, so they would be a structure.
And at that point, you trigger site plan review and everything else anyway, if it's a non-residential use.
Guess I'd have to look at that and talk, because it's not a use, it's I guess, but it is building an additional structure.
It's extra square footage.
And especially if you're gonna park under it, it's gotta meet building code.
Well, yes, it needs to go through building permit, I guess
But that, site plan review is triggered when you expand the building by 25% or more over X amount of years. It's a structure, even if it's detached, you need a building permit, and if it's more than 25% of the existing square footage. or X
But site
amount of
plan
square
approval
feet.
is still by right, it's not, it's not a subjective permit like a special
Yeah.
permit, and it would just be a shaping, and again, not that, I
Yeah.
don't really care if it goes to site plan or review or not, and if you don't want to include it, we don't need to, I just thought it would, it's one of those things that you kind of, it gives us, we're giving something else for when we're taking something away.
Yep.
So
number 9 basically says we would allow it by right,
correct.
but we would still require site plan review.
Yeah, it's not just put them up
Require a special
willy-nilly, it's,
permit.
you have to meet the requirements of other things, but it would be a by right use as opposed to a special permitted use. So, Where,
But I think anybody right now would argue that it is by right because it's on a structure.
they might,
Right, because you're putting it on the roof of a structure. So therefore,
Yeah.
it's allowed by right.
it's curious to me that there were a number of bylaws that called them out specifically as a by right use. And where our by right citing is 3 properties that are owned by municipal and quasi-municipal entities, this would expand that offering, just, even if it's already there, it expands it in the bylaw.
In terms of the minimum lot size and the setbacks, the concerns I have with those type of questions is I feel like we get that feedback better when we go through the special permit process anyway. We hear from the abutters and the people that are directly impacted.
I agree, but if you're looking at the bylaw, those are some of the things that I think it's imperative to at least raise the question on. And I think that the way that Marissa rephrased the question at least gives a little bit more context.
And I don't think those areas of the bylaw are necessarily as problematic. I mean, I don't think the setback has ever been a problem, the 200-foot. I think it's the buffering.
The clearing of that too.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I mean, Paula has expressed that there were those, when the bylaw was approved, that questioned the need for such a large setback. And with the lot size, personally, I think that there are probably lots in town that are sub 20 acres that may be in places that are appropriate to locate these uses that would attract people and have minimal to moderate impact on residences, as opposed to some of the larger parcels that meet that 20-acre requirement that are just discounted because they don't meet the requirement. And if the board is looking at the potential of changing how you limit sizing, whether it's by acreage or whether it's by percentage of lot or something like that, then is the 20-acre requirement still necessary? And does it unnecessarily preclude parcels that are commercial adjacent or industrial adjacent or in those districts that would offer the opportunity for the town to benefit from development of that parcel without impacting a residence?
So I think Marissa's question, which is, do you support the modifying the current solar bylaw to more clearly define the depth and types of plantings required to adequately screen large-scale solar installations from view, should be number 1. As that was that's what initiated this discussion. So I think that kind of frames the discussion. So I think that's one of the most important questions.
Yep.
Yeah, I really liked your input too.
I also think we need to define what the setback is in terms of, just clarify that it's from the property line to a panel or an inverter or whatever.
To a piece of equipment functionally, yeah.
Yeah, and so people understand that it's to the equipment, not to the edge of the clearing or the fence or a gate or whatever.
That brings up a good point. I mean, should we talk about what the density of the buffer zone, what the vegetative buffer zone should be? We don't ask that in this question, I mean, in this survey. And that's one of the things we're struggling with, is how much vegetation should be. And we've had people say that there's not enough vegetation, and clearly defining what a buffer zone is.
I don't believe we actually say vegetative buffer zone, do we? I think we just say buffer.
Yeah, the buffer is vegetation.
Well,
fencing.
so are we talking about the current bylaw or the buffering language that we talked about last meeting? Current bylaw just says buffer zone, and I think if you look at where it says buffer zone and setback get used interchangeably throughout the bylaw.
Which is the problem.
And setback has one definition, buffer zone has another, and it just says vegetated, it doesn't, grass is vegetation, moss or clover is vegetation, but it doesn't do anything to
Hide it.
visually screen.
Which the proposed bylaw that we looked at last week, or last meeting, talked about the density of the plantings, the size of the vegetative buffer. I'd like to put a question relative to that in here. And I'd have to go back and look at exactly what it was, but I'd like to understand what people think is a reasonable vegetated buffer. Especially, I'd like to hear from people that have been impacted by solar farms. I mean, should it be a 50-foot buffer? Should it be a 100-foot buffer? What do they feel is appropriate for a vegetated buffer?
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to lump everybody who's next to a solar field into one. I think since I've been here, there's been 2 applications that have made it in front of the planning board. One was for a relatively small, I think it was 75 kW, and there was a significant amount of wooded area, but it happened to reside on the abutter's property. And they were concerned that, well, what if I one day want to take that down and now I'm impacted? The other was obviously settlers. And I don't know that anyone expressed a desire to have a specific depth of buffer other than the fact that the bylaw said it says 200 feet, so it should be 200 feet. It wasn't, we need that 200 feet to be able to do this. They didn't want to be able to see it.
Yeah, but the problem is, and I think one of the individuals who was attended at our last meeting talked about the fact that that vegetation buffer isn't really working the way that it was envisioned, and that we should go visit the solar farms. I haven't had an opportunity to do that yet, but I think the point was, and I could be wrong, was that they are visible. And I think that we do want to screen them and
I agree.
lessen the impact from the abutters. So I would question, if we're gonna do a survey, one of my questions would be, is it, the planning board is looking at incorporating a vegetative buffer within the solar bylaw, what do you feel is appropriate? 50 feet, 100 feet, 150 feet, whatever we think, or whatever, but I would like to ask that question. Because that's, right now, we just have a 200-foot buffer, but that isn't necessarily vegetated. I think we're talking about a 200-foot buffer with a delineated portion of that buffer that's going to have to be vegetated.
And so I will say, I know that the field on Pleasant Street is not screened in any way.
I know, which is
And
really
I mean,
unfortunate.
it's essentially in a hayfield.
Right.
And there's there's a clump of evergreens here and here and here. And the houses screen it from the street, but I imagine from the backyard, you look out and you just see it. That was
The problem we're trying to
Oh,
address.
I understand. And that was approved back in 2012, 2013. And I don't know what the discussion or the hearings that led up to that look like. The Chase Road solar field is out in the middle of the woods. And my understanding is they did do some arborvitae plantings around the fences. I don't know how well they've survived in the deep woods because everything around it is natural wooded land. And I think originally their hope was that that would suffice as screening because, hey, it's out in the woods and, maybe 1 or 2 people are going to see it in the winter or spring, but for the most part, it's going to be screened for the majority of the year. I have not traversed anybody's yard over at Settlers. You can't see anything from any street. I will admit, I don't think I've been over there since all the leaves are down, but I've spent when I'm out at lunch, I'll take a ride over there randomly just to see where they are, how far they're along. and it's really difficult to tell that there's anything there other than the construction entrance and the fact that I know it's back there. Does that mean that people can't see it from their yard? No, it doesn't, but it's,
I know you can see it from the Fitchburg side, when you go up the hill by, is that Pearl Brook?
on
Wanders
New
up
West
the hill.
Townsend.
New
As
West
you
Townsend.
head up the hill there, you can,
Go-
You get a
Going
better
up
view.
New West Townsend towards Fitchburg and Howard Street.
going up, cross New West Townsend and continue up into Fitchburg on that side.
On Northfield or on New West Townsend?
Northfield, continue up Northfield.
Okay, so if
to
you cross
Fisher Road,
Northfield into
As you're coming
Fitchburg.
down the hill, you can
Oh,
see it.
okay.
Or if you go the other way, if you go up New West Townsend, and I don't know what that left is, just after Howard Street
Okay.
drops down, and you head up towards Ashby that way, when you come back the other way, you can kind of tell it's there. But, you know, the challenge with these situations is if somebody wanted to go out and clear a piece of land and put a house, they could put a house 20 feet off the property line.
Yes.
We're requiring 200 feet for a solar field. You know, and if somebody wanted to go out and had 30 acres of land and they wanted to clear cut and take every piece of timber off of it, they can do that with certain limitations, wetlands and so on. So it's a challenge, and I understand where people are coming from, and I think we need to do whatever we can to encourage proper screening, but, you know, that being said, you look at any lots where houses are going in nowadays, they clear cut them. Primarily because of septic systems and grading and so on.
And ease.
Yeah, you just have to clean the slate and move forward, and so, I think the 200-foot setback has, worked as well as you can expect. I mean, unfortunately, these are big sites and they get a lot of attention. In terms of the screening, one of the things that I think we need to try to think through in the process is if we want to encourage, say, pollinator habitat. The challenge with doing that is in order to get good results with a pollinator planting, in my opinion, you're going to have to do a fair amount of grubbing. Because if you go in and allow somebody to clear that and leave all the stumps, then you're really going to have a negative impact on how well you can plant that. And a lot of the brush and undergrowth is going to take off, and your pollinator habitat is going to be overrun by the competition. So, and do we really want to encourage people grubbing areas for pollinators? In my mind, I think you might be better off leaving,
Concentrated
especially-
just on the field.
concentrate on the field area for the pollinator habitat. And in the outlying areas, maybe you encourage planting, you know, some pollinator shrubs with other shrubs that would screen better. I don't.
And I went back and I reviewed it, and I was incorrect. There are no deciduous or evergreen pollinators. It's shrubs, mostly fruit-bearing shrubs of some sort, blueberry, raspberry, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, and I think that might go to your point. And when I went back and I was noodling around with the buffering, and we talked about giving the reduction of buffer size in exchange for pollinator habitat. And the language that I was sort of looking at was, you know, pollinator habitat within the field that uses plants off of the list, and that 65% of shrubbery planted within the buffer zone be from the pollinator list as well. And then, you know, you mix your trees otherwise, and that would give at least it you know, and those shrubs tend to be bushy and sort of covery. Even if the deer eat them, they tend to be fairly resilient and come back. So that would give you that low, knee-high sort of thickness. So
I'm not familiar with the site on Chase Road, but I know there was a resident here at our last meeting that was really concerned about that site in particular. Do we know how close the houses are to, like,
over 200 feet.
okay,
I mean, I think that I think that the field is
100 feet from.
the property
their
line, if I'm
lot.
not mistaken.
Okay.
I think that some of the houses out there are 2 stories, and they tend to sit up a little bit. So if you're out on a second-story deck or looking through a window, you look down on things and you see it. And again, I appreciate, I have woods in my backyard, and I appreciate people get used to things like that, and when it changes, it's shocking, and it can be disturbing.
One of my main goals, if we do modify the solar bylaw, is to, and I absolutely understand Tanner's point that right now people can go in and clear cut property, and I'd really like to look at this land disturbance bylaw that the town of Air passed, because I think that might be something we want to really look at to prevent that from happening or mitigate that from happening. But what I'd like to do, if we do modify the bylaw, is to incorporate a vegetated buffer zone into the 200-foot setback, or
Yes.
whatever that setback is. And that is basically all I'm saying, is I think we should ask that question.
Okay.
And that is what, the first question that
Yeah,
I'm recommending that Marissa
Yep.
she had put the language together, but I'd like to know what people believe is a reasonable
So have that as question 2.
vegetation. Yeah.
And then
what
get
is a
into,
reasonable amount of vegetation.
so does the board even want to ask about the 20 acres, or do you just want to leave it in?
I think it's a good ask.
I think the way that Marissa modified it
definitely.
makes sense.
Yes,
Is-
yeah, and,
Yeah.
and she also indicated,
This is her.
Yeah.
and there was some discussion about, the sizing for small and large. And, we noted when we were looking at, the information that my colleague had sent me, that most other communities were up in the 250 kW as the limit for small, which is, exponentially larger than we have, and I don't think that necessarily changing to that is what we want to do, but I do know that I can think of at least a half a dozen people who have come and wanted to do a small ground-mounted system to operate their home, and 10 kW just wasn't enough. And so they were either putting in 10 kW on the ground and whatever they could get on their roofs to make up the difference, or they were seeking special permits to get away from the 20 acres and be able to seek a special permit from the board to put a larger system. Most of them have, for one reason or another, I think most people just said, you know what, I can do it split between the two. But, I know my generator is a 14 kW and it doesn't run everything in the house. It runs a fair amount of it, but, is there a needle that needs to be moved even slightly to accommodate people's ability to operate their homes? Is that even something that the board wants to consider?
I mean, I would certainly consider it, given 2 things. One is that we don't have a limit on what somebody can put on a structure. And I feel like for a homeowner that, say, wants to put 20 kW on, and their house doesn't face the right direction, or they have dormers or whatever, why should they be limited by that when their neighbor might have the perfect roof? At least this would give them the option to go ground mount, do the same thing their neighbor could, and get the right spacing. The other thing to keep in mind with all of this is, ground mount tends to be more productive than roof mounted, because you can change the pitch of the panel and face it perfectly to solar
As
south
opposed
and
to
max.
making it- yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to just.
Your roof is here, put the panels on.
And our limit now is
10.
10. 10 isn't very big.
I would agree.
I've got 10 on our garage, and it's 42 panels.
Well,
So,
my understanding is that the roof mounts are limited by some state law or the utility company to 12 and a half. Okay. That's what I've been told.
so what we ran into when we did our array was, if you have single phase power coming in Unitil limits you to 10 kW, which I think they do it AC, so my system might do 12.5 DC, and then when it converts it over to AC, it's 10. I don't know the electrical engineering side of it. But if you have a commercial building with three-phase, then they'll allow 25.
And so in theory, a homeowner could choose to upgrade to three-phase
If it's available.
if it's available.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And then also for comparison, that first A&R that we had tonight, that's a 10 kW system that has 2 racks of panels. So that gives you an idea of, in plan, and that's a 13-acre parcel.
yeah, yeah.
I personally, I believe, I know I looked at one point at solar panels and my roof would not support them, and I would need more than 10 kW. My neighbor also looked at it and would have to go to a ground-mounted system and would have to be higher than 10 kW. So I think that there is a need from a residential perspective for higher than 10 kW. What I ended up doing is going to the community solar, and that's been working out great. But I think that it is something we should look at.
Do you want me to put a question similar to 1 or 2 that says currently the bylaw limits small-scale ground-mounted solar to 10 kW? Would you support keeping it the same, raising it to 25, raising it to 50?
Well,
So
I
other-
wouldn't support raising it to 50.
Well, and
So I think we should talk about
raising it
what
to
we
20,
would
raising it to
support.
30, whatever. I mean, I don't
I think
know.
25 is pretty logical, because they're gonna be capped pretty much by Unitil. at
So
that
raising it
point
to
anyway.
25, yes or
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
Yeah. And that's
I would-
not a huge area, especially with ground mounted. It's more efficient, so you need fewer panels. You know, my system takes up roughly 700 square feet, thereabouts. You know, so if you go 2.5 times that, you got 2,000 square feet or so of yard space.
So I would like to do it kind of stepped. I would do 15 and then 25. I would do the 3 questions, keeping it the same, 15 or 25.
So did that reduction count for the ground mount as well as the roof mount? Without the 3-phase, if you only had single-phase power?
Doesn't matter how it's.
Okay, so then a lot of residences aren't going to be able to.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of explored the idea when we looked into it, but we would have had to upgrade the service from the street to the pole, then go in the ground, whole new panel, and then we were kind of at a tipping point where I think with 25 kW, you get up around 70 panels. Well, I couldn't fit 70 on the roof. I might have been able to fit 60. So now I spent a bunch of money and
And then you're
now I
maxing
can't
it
buy
out.
the
Yeah.
panels to get the money back, you know? So we just went with the 10 kW, so.
All right. Can we get any more on that?
No, I think so we'll add the vegetative buffer question, the raising of the lower limits.
I do think your question about you had a question about whether it should be the size of the system or the acreage, and I'd like to see a question relative to that.
Okay.
So footprint versus,
Oh, and I don't have that on there, do I?
No, you don't.
and then Paula made a good suggestion that was moving of the questions,
Yes. So Marissa's question will be number 1. Then the buffer will be the depth will be number 2. And then we'll do, so we'll do 1 and 2 as 3 and 4. And we'll just keep them in that order from there.
And we're going to remove the fencing question.
Correct.
Yeah, everybody's in agreement with that? Sounds good.
And do you want to keep 9 or not? Canopies?
A little bit of a pushy maybe?
No.
Yep.
Well, I think Tanner's point is correct, though. If they build a building, if they get a building permit to build a canopy, then they can by right put the solar panels on them. So the question really is moot. So I would eliminate it myself. I mean, I would check with the building official, but I believe that they're going to require a building permit, and at
I'm
that
gonna check
point, it's
with-
considered a roof.
I'm going to check with council, just because
Yeah.
I feel like, yes, it's a structure, yes, it requires a permit, but I feel like it sort of, splits that line of,
I mean, anything over 200 square feet.
yeah, like I said,
Carport, otherwise, I mean-
I've seen enough bylaws that include it specifically that there's some reason for it, and I just want to, I don't want to miss something that gives us an easy win on, finding a place to put them that isn't harmful.
Yep.
Well, I think we're ready to move on. Do we have an update on the master plan?
No, I have reached out to a couple of engineering firms, and I have not heard back as to whether or not they do population projections. I mean, that's really where we're stuck, is whether we're doing 2 RFPs or whether we're doing one that includes that. So I'm hoping that between now and the next meeting, I'll get an answer.
Anybody have any pressing issues on the update on the master plan?
I mean, the only thing that comes to mind on my end is coordinating our efforts with the other boards, and in my opinion, especially the selectmen, I just feel like a lot of what they're working on falls under the master plan. Right, when you have a workshop about Old Primary, that's master planning, and I don't understand why the master plan and the planning board hasn't been included in the process, but I feel like we should be.
I agree.
Tomorrow.
I agree.
They're doing that tomorrow night.
So, and I think if you look back through town meetings and the ideas that have been discussed and so on, one of the themes that you hear at town meeting is we need a comprehensive plan. We need to all get on the same page and know what the future of all this stuff is. And so I don't know if it would make sense to just reach out to the Board of Selectmen, send a letter. Just food for thought.
I mean, is that something you would like me to do?
I think it makes sense
Yeah.
that we're working on an RFP for the master plan that will include facilities. I mean, that was all of us, was one of our primary services and facilities, and that we should participate in discussions relative to facilities.
Yeah.
I had planned on attending that meeting. I'm not positive that I will, but I had planned on it.
Unfortunately, I have another meeting tomorrow night, so I can't attend.
Okay.
So we can send a letter.
So in what
Is
form are you
that
going to reach out to them?
I don't know. I will take direction from the board on that. Would you like me to send a letter to, or an email, or a memo to the town manager, to the chair of the Board of Selectmen, to both?
I think both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any specific content? Just,
I think we just, keep it short and sweet and say we're moving forward, working on the master plan, specifically population projections and facilities, and we would like to coordinate our efforts with yours.
that sounds pretty good. Yeah, Paul?
Yep, I agree.
All right. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes?
I have, and Marissa had some amendments, and I'd like to table them until we can discuss them, because I have some concerns about the amendments. I would like to offer my own, and would like to have Marissa part of that conversation.
So we want to put off,
It's fine.
Yep.
okay?
You have plenty of time.
Very good. Committee reports. Capital planning, because of the 2 feet of snow last Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, we didn't, we rescheduled for tomorrow night. And the Stormwater Task Force, no, the Agricultural Commission has met since our last meeting. So whoever else has committee reports.
TCP, BDC, we met last Wednesday, approved the RFQ for the town manager to send out. So at this point, we're going to be looking for an engineering firm to work with, and we worked out a schedule for interviewing the engineering firms that respond. We have a really tight timeline. I think everybody on the committee agrees that we're up against it in terms of getting this thing ready for town meeting, but we're going to do our best and go from there, so.
Very good. And is there any, has there been any discussion about the chair, the chair, I believe, works for an engineering firm? Is there any discussion about that?
In terms of that firm,
Yeah.
I don't think it's in their wheelhouse, so to speak. Yeah. It's a
You're
big
looking for an
project.
architectural engineering firm,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Open Space is meeting tomorrow night.
Very good. And those are the only committees that you guys are? I will mention also, tomorrow night, we're going to be meeting with DPW Director to discuss their capital requests. And that's at 5 o'clock. Director's items.
We need JTC and MRPC board members or representatives?
Didn't we talk about switching?
We did
Marissa
talk
was
about it, and neither of the folks who were potentially going to do it were able to make those nights work.
Yeah, Marissa can't make those nights work. I cannot make both of those night works, but let me look at the MRPC website and see specifically when the meetings are, and we'll report back at the next meeting. This might be something that a new member might be interested in. Do we have any talent bank forms for a new member?
No.
No. Okay.
MRPC is the first Thursday,
Yeah.
but they skip
A lot.
Yeah, they're not meeting this month. I got an email, they're not meeting this
your
month.
words, not mine.
They meet when they have necessity to.
So that may be something that I can do, but I need to check my other meeting schedule.
So 2 representatives from Open Space Residential Design Bylaw?
So this was what we talked about, and I had emailed out to you. It's pretty beefy. This is the state's model. They usually put a lot of thought and care into their models, and they usually give you a lot of options, which is why there's all of this blue text. So if we were to modify and adopt it, it often becomes about half, if not more, trimmed down than it is, just because stuff gets pulled out. This is, again, a open space by right, anything other than open space by special permit. And what that does is it gives the board more discretion on limiting the expanse of development. Because when someone comes in and says, well, I want to take this 60-acre parcel, and I don't really want to build on just 30 acres, I want to build on all 60, and I want to build these giant houses with these giant lawns, the board can say, really, that we don't find that that's in concert with what our approval criteria would be, and we're not going to approve that, and they can go and still build their development, but it has to be on the smaller footprint.
This is what the cluster development attempted to do, but not effectively, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
This would replace the cluster.
That's correct.
Cluster bylaw.
Yes, and it would take cluster right out of the nomenclature, and I would say natural resource protection zoning is a good way to class it, and that's what a lot of communities are moving towards calling it, because the intent is to retain some of the natural space in there, and it's not intended to stop development, it's intended to shape it and control it, and
Do it in a way
retain,
that protects the
retain that
natural
character
resources.
of open space.
This complies directly with some of the goals of our existing master plan, which we need to be looking at. This ties in really well with master planning and with all of the charrettes that we've had. The thing that we hear over and over again is retaining the character of Lunenburg, and I think this does that. And as you said, it doesn't prevent development, but it outlines how it has to be done. And I personally, I mean, certainly we need to go through it and vet it and decide what we want to incorporate.
You know,
but
and I don't expect to have any discussion about this tonight, but this is what I was talking about, and all of the blue is sort of like editor's notes, and here's things to pay attention to, oh, here's some alternatives, that kind of stuff. Most of the highlighted stuff is where you would obviously insert name of city or town, so it's, but there's a lot in here. It can easily be pared down, it can easily be manipulated and changed, but it's a good shell to start with. You know, some communities adopt it just as it is, which that's also perfectly reasonable, but I know that there's some distinctive aspects to the community, and you may want to reference in some of that thought into here.
I would only have one comment on that. Anything that the state puts forth as a model is not necessarily anything that's going to be representative of Lunenburg.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that this is the perfect thing and we should adopt it right now. I'm saying you can, and some communities do, but, which is why, you know, looking through it and talking about it makes sense. But you will notice that, you know, Brewster, New Salem, Shutesbury, other than Brewster, we're not talking about really urban-style communities. I mean, Shutesbury is a very small little place on the other side of the Quabbin. So this isn't like, it's not like, oh, well, Newton adopted this so they could feel good about themselves. It's intended for communities that are more rural and agrarian to hold on to.
Well, one of the things I'd really like to see is something like this that protects and more open space on development. I'd also like to see us look at incorporating more BMPs into our bylaw and requirements for BMPs.
So,
Low-impact development, I'd really like to see us look at that, and I think this goes to also to I'm not sure what the town of Air has done, but if they're talking about land disturbance, I'm sure that's also, I'd like to look at that bylaw. I'd really like to have a workshop about natural resources and how we can protect that as we move forward and as the community changes, and I think all of those are linked together.
and we talked a little bit last week or last meeting, about the rules and regulations and the need to update them, the rules and regulations for the division of land under subdivision control. That's a place where we would install a lot of that low-impact development stuff. We could look at encouraging it through commercial development. Sometimes it's a harder, not a harder sell, you're less likely to be successful with it in some of those commercial areas just based on the nature of the development. It can work, but in the rules and regulations that I've been reviewing from other communities, a lot of them have moved to low-impact development and nature-based BMPs for stormwater. What my suggestion will be once we get into that is, that's great and we can have that as our primary, but we will need to have traditional pipe and pond stuff as secondary, because there are places where the low-impact stuff just isn't going to work for one reason or another. So that would tie in with this, and it would all sort of start to mesh back together.
Yeah, and I think it all ties together, and at some point, I mean, maybe after the holidays, we can talk about maybe doing a workshop for the looking at the air bylaw, looking at this, looking at, because I think they're all really linked.
They are.
Yeah, maybe we could reach out to the Board of Selectmen and see if they want to sit down with us together, or us with them.
Well, that's about facilities, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we could mention that if they had any input on that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to see more communication amongst all the boards myself.
All right, we've talked about tree clearing bylaw and population projection.
We have?
So I'm pretty sure that I said tree clearing bylaw, but actually what it is that AIR has is a land disturbance bylaw. So, I mean, we could just incorporate that, add tree clearing to our land disturbance stuff that we didn't get through at town meeting last time.
Well, I think, based on town meeting feedback with the earth removal and fill stuff, I feel like we need to be, a little bit more careful with how we put things forward. I mean, there were a few people that clearly spoke out against the earth removal permitting, but I paid more attention to how the vote goes, and I felt like 90% of the people in the room voted against it. Maybe it was just me, but I feel like it was voted down overwhelmingly. So, and like land disturbance or tree clearing, in my mind, fall in the same area. And I think we can achieve some of the open space and conservation goals better through like the model for open space and development rather than some of the other venues, that's all. If we encourage low-impact development, if we encourage more open space with any of the new construction that's going on, then you protect the trees and you protect the water, but...
We already do encourage, and we just get blank stares typically, because they've got their way of doing it, and...
You mean at town meeting?
No, I'm sorry, yeah.
I do think we need to be careful about how we move forward with any kind of bylaw or anything at town meeting. I think somehow we've got to get more word out, and I mentioned that at the last meeting, and I think we've got to get more public involvement. And I know it's not necessarily required when we talk about rules and regs or when we talk about, but I think we have to. I think we have to have public hearings on everything that we're bringing forward for the public. And I think that's our obligation, is to get public input. I mean, so I'd like to see us really, when we get into these discussions and when we start having these discussions, publicize that we're having them, whether it be on the scroll, whether it be announced at the selectmen's meeting, because I know a lot of more people watch the selectmen's meetings than the planning board meetings, but I think we need to be actively more
And the earth
informative
removal
to the
bylaw was
community.
talked about with the selectmen numerous times.
I understand that, but we never had input from the public, and that's what's lacking.
Well, I think the input we got was town meeting.
Right, right.
And-
But I think that had we had the input beforehand, we may have rethought what we were bringing forward. Or could have more clearly explained it. I think that's the other part of it, is if the public's more aware of what's going on and can get behind it, then we're going to be better suited, and it may modify what we bring forward, because we have the input.
Most likely would.
Yeah. I also think it'd be helpful to be more focused with certain things in terms of, like, with the earth removal, I think, we that's a pretty big set of regulations. And if we could stream it, make it more concise, easier to understand, that helps. But also, maybe we should have done earth removal as one, fill
Well,
as
and I think
another.
that's probably what we would look at doing for the spring, is pull them apart and have them as two sections of the same chapter, because the earth removal we have is, I mean, it's functional, but it's, if it were applied the way that it's written, everybody would need an earth removal permit.
But, and that's why I think what's missing is, I think having a public information session that has a PowerPoint that says existing regulations, what the changes would do, and clearly involving the public and having that display available and putting it on our website, so people can click on that link and see that PowerPoint presentation that explains everything, so that they don't go to town meeting and are not clear on what they're voting. I think we've got to make a more concerted effort to get that information out. Had we had a comparison chart that showed the differences and been better prepared to answer those questions, I think the outcome would have been very different.
Yeah. And the other reservation I have is I feel like when you go back to town meeting with the exact same issue, you really need to have a good reason. I don't like the concept of the planning board wants this and we just keep throwing it at town meeting.
No,
until
and I
we
think-
get the right people in the room. I think if we're gonna go back to town meeting with anything, and at this point, it sits with the Board of Selectmen, and so it's business as usual at this point. But if we're gonna go back down that road, I wouldn't support anything that is the exact same approach.
No, well, and I think what I believe I recommended was removing the fill portion from the bylaw and going back with the updated earth removal items, with the transfer to the board and the new standards and thresholds and that kind of stuff. And I think that in and of itself would be enough of a change that you could say, listen, this started because we have this that's not working and hasn't worked for these reasons, or works well enough, but we have the potential where it could work better. And we're actually making it easier for people to not need this. And then if the board still wants to look at fill, we can write a separate bylaw, or we can come back with fill at a later date after, looking at it a little bit further.
Personally, I don't disagree with that, but before we bring it back to town meeting, I would want to see public information systems, sessions in March or April at the latest, that do exactly that kind of thing, that do a comparison chart of what's existing, why isn't it working?
I would suggest you'd want to do it in February.
Okay, that's great.
Because that way, if you're not going to put it on the warrant, if you did it in March or April, you'd already be on the warrant.
Yeah,
And-
okay.
and then
Okay, fair.
It's there, and you either have to pass it over, or you get into another process.
Yeah, so if we're going to propose it in the spring, I think we've got to really understand and make it understandable to people, what is it that we're adopting, because I think it is a very difficult regulation to read, and I think we've got to simplify it. And I think we've got to put forth the information about why we're doing it and what it means truly for the business holders. And I think the question about the fact that, was the permit holder invited, did you ask for their input? I think that's a very valid question. I know that they were aware of the hearing, but I think that asking for their input would be very helpful.
Yep.
Well, I believe you did, didn't you? You waited until you had a
Well,
draft and...
and they did not see the draft of the bylaw. But
So-
the regulations are really what is going to impact them, because that's what's going to drive how and what they do.
I would want them to see the regulation.
And I agree, and the regulations wouldn't
I
be
mean, the
adopted
bylaw.
by
I
town
would
meeting,
want them
but
to
we
see the
could, and
bylaw.
that's, the bylaw is much easier to button up now and get over to them. So I'll have something for the first meeting in January for the board to look at earth removal only, and then after you guys give comment on that, we can send it over to Keating and...
And we can set up when we're going to have the public information sessions in February and get that publicized.
Yep.
Sounds good. Notices and communications.
All been scanned?
Meeting schedule, we meet here 6:30 unless otherwise indicated, second and fourth Monday. January 13th and January 27th are our next two meetings. Any outstanding,
We'll have Rob's Hill Common Drive on the 13th.
those are the folks who put off tonight?
That's correct.
Folks that put off tonight.
Mr. Gorman from Ross Associates, who asked to be continued.
Okay, yeah, okay.
You did have one other notice and communication.
Oh, season's greetings. From Graves Engineering, from our review engineer. Thank you. do we want to ask for anything for either one of those meetings? Other than we've already asked?
I was gonna say, I think we've already asked
We
for a
got a
few
lot of
things.
stuff already, I think.
Any ongoing items?
No, I mean, I think we've covered most of those.
Okay. And there's no public to have comment? Or board comment?
Also,
Very good. I would take a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Thank you.
Don't go, you've got to sign plans. Well, luckily, they're all easily signable.